All
Hello,
right.
everyone. Hi. I'm today here with Ethan, and we're going to be discussing Quadra tags. What's up, Ethan? How are you?
All
Hello,
right.
everyone. Hi.
Pretty good. I think we're going to have a good discussion here, and going to discuss some concepts that most people haven't explored yet, which should be interesting. So, you know,
That's good. So, could you just tell us a little bit about Quadra tags? Like, how did you have your mentor got you into it
that's
to
right.
start with? So, how did you get into the idea, and how did he come up with the idea, and what are the basics? How's it put together?
So, in essence, what happened was we wanted, in the beginning, my mentor and I wanted a theory that would explain, or a subset of the model that would explain intratype differences. So, I'm ILI, and I want to look at another ILI and be able to gauge, okay, what specifically is different between us, even though we are the same sociotype. So, we came up with a system of blocking so that we'd say, okay, if one function is blocked with another function, we call this a specific tag. So a tag is like it's like a block function where you have like NITE blocked together is going to look like something, for example. And then you'd have NIFE blocked together is going to look different because obviously there's a little bit of a different interaction there. And so the horizontal blocking is taken advantage of with, static dynamic and all that. But we also have new vertical blocking functions. So we have NIFI, for example, NITI, and then we claim that those are going to represent different concepts. So we use these tags to explain intratype differences in the sense that we have a subtype that's dictated by which tag do we prefer to use the most, which tag have we learned to use the most. It's nurture based. So it's going to be more subjective. It's not super duper logically defined, but we do understand that somebody in their lives is going to go through a specific set of circumstances and develop different strategies to use their functions in a specific way, and that's basically what we're trying to track. But there has been a lot of questions as to, okay, we have the regular type with the horizontal blocking, but we also have these new subtypes that enjoy vertical blocking. So if I could vertically block NI and FI together, then I'd be an INTJ that would look like I have more of an NF preference. So then we get those kinds of INTJs versus, or ILIs, oh my God, MBTI terminology, versus the ILIs that have a much more heavy NT fixation. So then that's the basics, more or less.
I see. So I guess one of the things which I always found interesting about this theory is that it does make use of these vertical blockings, and whereas horizontal blockings are the more traditional ideas of blockings, where you have where they match in terms of static dynamics, say, TI, SE or TI, NE, or NI and TE. These vertical blockings do not follow the normal rules of blocking. That you have a dynamic element coming together, and I guess that's also where I found I felt a little bit puzzled because it's, one of the major parts that I found with socionics is that it doesn't really start with psychology; it starts with metaphysics.
That's right.
With our the reality both around us in the physical sense and also in our heads. That was anything you could point to, anything you can imagine is thought to be composed of information in some way, whether it's say the ideas in my head, or it's the physical landscaping around me, such as the structure of the atoms coming together to form that television behind me. And you can always imagine these different static parts coming together, the framing of, for instance, ideas in some sort of a theoretical structure to create a theory like socionics. Or you can think in terms of more dynamic comings together, say certain processes working in their environment, say more of a TESI example, or mechanical processes or emotional movements having effects in the long term, so with NI. Where I have difficulty imagining is what, for instance, SI and TI would look like together if you use that as more of an alpha example.
Right. So the difference is that, we have, it's kind of the same thing here, is in the horizontal blocks, we have functions that differ by introversion, extroversion, but they have the same dynamic static orientation.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at is mostly the same thing, is we have tags that share the same introverted, extroverted orientation, but then different static dynamic orientations. So then we have, mostly mixed static dynamic, but heavily leaning one introverted versus extroverted. So then we'd have SITI are concepts that are completely, reductionist. That's what we're seeing with SITI, is it's incredibly reductionist, where you have with TISE, it's more expanding outward. The logic is expanding outward, especially in the case of LSI, where you have a principled axiomatic-based system that's being used in a force sense or a physical sense. Whereas with the SITI, you have these axiomatic systems being used to facilitate homeostasis and keep systems running. So when we see, like, for example, LIIs with the TISI subtype, they're going to be much more heavily reductionist. They're going to want to, wind the theories back a little bit. They're going to want to reduce things to first principles before they begin to theory craft, where we have with the LIIs with the horizontal blocking, prefer that with the TINE, are more going to advance the theories before they reduce and come back to first principles.
Okay, but also this is also something I wonder, when you go to reducing to first principles,
right?
How's that related to homeostasis?
Oh, well, in the sense that it's creating a more streamlined framework, so that you have like that maybe that was a bad example, but the reason
it's just because for instance, when you say TI and SE, I can think of real life examples.
Right.
Like, for instance, drawing a line in the sand saying you cross, there's going to be a problem. Or enforcing any sort of rule, like the law enforcement in general. You can think of an example of structure being enforced in reality. But when we talk about TI and SI together, that's when we're having more difficulty imagining an example where this is a construct of information composed of TI and SI blocked together.
So it's not, well, with the TI-SI examples, you can come up with real world examples because that block is a mixture of introverted and extroverted functions. You're taking something that's already inside and you're creating something in the outside world, or reverse, you take something outside and throw it inside. With these completely introverted blockings like TI-SI, all the action is happening inside. No real world output is being created. That's why we see with the subtypes who prefer the doubly introverted tags, they're not very assertive. Maybe they don't produce very much output. They're very internal. They're very, I want to process things all day. I want to come to conclusions. For example, TI-SI. I want to keep circling these logical principles around in my head, for example, so that I can have the clearest definition of my internal state. That's one thing.
That sounds, I can certainly see the TI there. But also, because when you say it goes towards internal, that's why I wonder, is there any chance that we're also conflating introversion and extroversion in the socionic sense with the internal and external in the socionic sense?
That's right. Is that TI-SI might be kind of a bad example because you can kind of see it as more of a contradictory example because there's two external examples, but they're both introverted. So that is much harder to see, in an example.
Because if we're okay, fine. Let's go towards an example of, I think it's means, isn't it, rather than drive?
Yes, where the doubly extroverted.
Right. So what would be an example of that, of a construct of information composed of two extroverted elements coming together?
So we could have, for example, if we had TESE, we'd have completely force-based systematic logic, is just the straight dynamics of external phenomena is what we're seeing. And there's no connection to what's going on inside. It's just, or in the internal, not the introverted sphere.
Oh no, sure, but even say with, you know, TESI, for instance, I still wouldn't say that there's anything internal about that. It's still sensation and logic. It's still doubly external, because sensation is external regardless of it's introverted or extroverted. And we can usually point to many examples of TESI. Any physical process which has some sort of effect on its physical environment, we could say as being TE and SI. It's how things are working in the here and now. But whereas how we differentiate that from an example of where it's clearly not TESE, it's so TESI, it's TESE. What would be a clear example of that? Like, for instance, a good example of TESI in my head would be something like a water wheel, right? That is turning due to the flowing of water, and that's then generating, you know, kinetic energy for maybe, for instance, say the grinding of corn husks or wheat husks into flour. So I can say that's a very good example of TE and SI working together. Where would be a good example of TESE?
You see, it's been a while since I've ran through the examples because I haven't been studying this for the past month or so. But I can't. Okay, see, I can't give a specific example of TESE because one of the thing that I was focusing on was mainly the subtypes. And see, I'm probably suffering because I haven't rigorously defined the tags yet. But we know that the reason why I'm convinced that these tags even exist is that these groupings do exist in the model. There is something similar between these blocks in the model as mandated by the functional dichotomies. So theoretically, there should be something in common with those any two functions that we, you know, pair together. So
what do you what exactly do you mean in terms of functional dichotomies? Which ones?
Well, the ones that determine the vertical blockings. So you'd have, like, I know one of them's inert contact. I know one of them is bold cautious, and then the other one is going to be just combining the dichotomies together to make the small groups.
Well, yeah, sure. We know, for instance, that, you know, the leading and the mobilizing function share a inertness, for instance.
Right.
But why does that then mean that they can be vertically blocked?
Well, see, that was just out of convenience for the model, is that, you know, because we couldn't really figure out any other way to block functions that made sense in that kind of situation. Like, we could block NI and SE together and make like an axis.
I mean, you can do that. Yes, I agree.
Right.
Yes.
But then that doesn't really make sense in a subtype context.
Yes, exactly. Because when you're preparing the opposites together, and really gradations. Now, one thing I've been thinking about with this, of what you call vertical blockings, I see them as certain themes.
Okay.
I wouldn't go so far as you in terms of saying these are metaphysical blockings in the same way as, say, TI and NE are metaphysical. I have difficulty whenever I try, and I have tried doing this myself. I've had difficulty trying to put together some sort of metaphysical construct of what you call vertical blockings. But what I can see are themes. Take NE and FE, for instance.
Right.
Enthusiasm around sharing new ideas and insights.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or when I think of SITI, I would say the elegance and symmetric beauty of the system.
Exactly. See, okay, this is the kind of examples I was looking for.
Yes.
But I couldn't describe to you certain actions. You know, I'm having a hard time coming up with specific actions because you're right. It is more of a thematic representation.
It's like they don't interlock. Like, for instance, you know, you can for instance put bricks together with cement, and so the field is holding together the objects. And that fits together in a metaphysical sense. But when it comes to two different kinds of meshes, they don't really directly intersect. Instead, they overlay with each other. And that's why I feel it's more of a theme rather than a blocking, if you see what I mean.
I guess that's fair. Yeah, I could say that. And that's what I told you earlier in the chat, is that, you know, they're not going to be the same. These vertical blockings, they're going to be fundamentally different. We're going to see fundamentally different representations of these things, because we obviously know how horizontal blocking works. It's been defined since who knows how long. But the vertical blockings are, you know, we don't know what they look like yet. So assuming that they're going to behave exactly like horizontal blockings is difficult, like you said, like coming up with those examples. Like I couldn't even come up with those examples, but I know that thematically we do see those things working together in an intuitive sense. I just have a hard time expressing them necessarily.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like each time I try to do it, it becomes an adjective to a noun. Like NICI, a purposeful ideology, for instance.
That's true.
PISI, an elegant, symmetrical system. Or FINSI, being feeling comfortable about the thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So you know, what I mean, it isn't a thing of itself. It's something describing something else.
Right.
Also, I wonder if we use, well, I guess a niggle of mine is if we take this idea of vertical blocking, which doesn't quite work in the same way as a horizontal blocking.
Right.
If we use the word blocking to describe this, then it also deprives us of the ability to use the word vertical blocking in another sense, which can be, I think, quite useful.
That's right.
And I remember I discussed this earlier. So take myself as I think most people would agree I'd be annihilated. There may be some disagree, but that's fine. Now, I would say that when I come to use extroverted sensation, and there's always a time in our lives when you have to use our role function.
Yes.
I find that I'm almost certain to fail if I try to block it horizontally in my model A.
I see.
Because the vulnerable function is very much the computer says no function. It's not going to help the SE or the role, which does rise to the occasion when needed, even very reluctantly.
Yeah.
So instead, I find that when I'm using SE to some limited but effective way, it's because I've what I call vertically blocked. In terms of moving literally upwards in the model A to the creative function. And so, for instance, say I'm in a position of authority, I can lay down the law. I can say something. If you're being naughty in my group, I can kick you out the group.
That's right.
So now that could be an example of SC and TI together, and other situations where I feel that I'm empowered in some way to create rules to enforce some form of authority. I don't like doing it, but I can do it. I can't do it with SCFI. Like as soon as it's a matter of my personal disgust towards something or anything like that, I don't feel I have a valid reason to enforce myself.
That's right.
So, but that's, I mean, that I see is a very useful way of using the term vertical blocking, which does bring some insights in terms of how types act in situations which aren't according to their liking. It doesn't feel quite as natural to them, but it is something they can do. So I wonder, would it be possible if we were to take the most the greatest benefits of these ideas of quadra tags, if instead of calling them vertical blockings, we can call them themes?
That's fair. Because like you said, there is already a type of vertical blocking that is much more vertical. That it actually literally, like, you go up and down. But then the other, I don't want to call them blocks anymore because we just went through why. But the other groupings, they're on the Wikisocian. Andrew called them confidence value, which is interesting because they're inert, bold, and what was the other one? I don't remember. But those two, inert and bold, are both like, okay, you really trust this function, you know? So that we have like the dominant and then mobilizing, the base mobilizing pair. That's like, oh, you're really strong with that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you really are confident with that, you know?
And that's because the mobilizing function is like a mini leading function.
Right.
It has the same way of acting the immobilized function wants to act quite like the leading function, it just can't do it as well, and it slips up.
Right.
But but as a result, it has a feeling of unearned confidence.
Yes.
And as a result, you could say that within quadras, you have the extroverts push or drive one theme, and the introverted of a quadra push the other theme.
There we go. That would make much more sense.
Yeah.
It was just the way that I see. What I was going to say is that we do actually track these interactions. Like we see them happening, but the reason I was having a hard time describing them as blocks is, like you said, they're more like themes.
Yeah.
Is that maybe they're pushing. Oh, that's another thing. Is that there's interactions between the tags. Is that there's dynamics. That's what I've been working on, or that's what I had been working on. Is that maybe you're pushing a theme using a blocking pair, or you know what I mean? Like you.
How can you give me an example?
Well, okay, like you would take. Well, just like mechanically, the way that the types supervise and activate each other, on relations of supervision and benefit, is according to these pairs. So I'd have, let's say, I'd get benefited by an INFP's or EII's FI plus, and then I'd be benefited by that, and then I would take my NI and I'd supervise the LSE's TE. We have this interaction here. We have this moves to that. We have one end of an axis moving to the other end of an axis. There's an interaction there. And that's what I'm theorizing that has happened in the quadra, is that you have one function moves to another function in an interaction, rather than just static categories like we're seeing with the groupings, is they're just static categories. We want to be able to explain eventually, in a very rudimentary sense, how are these things interacting with each other. And we can do that through kind of combinations of the groupings, as I just described.
Now, this also overlaps quite a bit with a discussion I think I was having with Emery on your group today. And it is looking into the positivist, negativist reigning dichotomy.
Yes, yeah.
And how it unites the members of a ring.
Yes.
In that, for positive and negativist, it will be the supervision ring. And I still remain skeptical over exactly how that thing's defined, but I certainly appreciate the mathematical necessity there. And I think there's a question of finding the right definition, which should clarify it better. I'm not satisfied yet with, for instance, negativist being, someone's trying to reduce the thing which they're doing, which is what.
The thing with negativist is that they're looking at, or theoretically, this is how it's described in a speculative sense, is that the negativist looks at something like, we have the aspects, we have information that lies within certain aspects, and the person who has a negativist function is looking at that which is negative within the domain of their function and seeking to remove those negative aspects using the function itself.
Yeah. In other words, remove the bad parts within the domain of their function. Now, this is where, so for instance, let's take an IEE, for instance.
Yes.
Where this would probably be a more challenging example, because IE would be extrovert intuition. And the essence of extrovert intuition would normally be to expand the range of possibilities. So it places it in direct opposition to an IEI, which is trying to get rid of these trivial possibilities to focus on the greatest meaning. So how would the IEE demonstrate this negativism in their use of extrovert intuition, with it still being a very clear example of extrovert intuition, just as valid as an ILE's use of extrovert intuition?
So what you'd have is there's these dual pairs, not dual pairs, but they're kind of like pairs, is that you'd have NI plus and then NE minus, is that they're both, theoretically, they're both fulfilling the same purpose in different ways, is that the theme here is awareness, is that in this NI plus NE minus sphere, NI plus is trying to contract the space of awareness to realize one possibility. That's the goal of the IEI, is to have a vision and then follow through with the vision. Is that, and then with the IEE, with the NE minus, it's looking to remove those things that will limit the space of awareness. So in a sense, they are still expanding their awareness by removing things that would contribute to a bad understanding. I suppose you could, talk about it that way.
So you mean, okay, I mean, for instance, removing constraints on their growth and personal development.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Right. So whereas an ILE won't be looking to remove constraints on sort of the development and the exploration. But instead, what would they be doing? Would it be a question of just
going higher and higher? Right.
And so just doing it without removing any sorts of constraints.
Right. Just seeking the straight possibilities as they lie, instead of kind of focusing on, okay, before we seek out these new possibilities, we need to get rid of that which is going to prevent us from doing so effectively.
Okay. But that also, then it starts to feel a bit lopsided, because for instance, I can see exactly where an IEE is most likely to express that desire to remove constraints.
Okay.
And it's always around introverted logic. It's that this theory is too rigid, too structured, too boxy for me to prove if I can explore the possibilities in my understanding and see how it actually is shown to work. And see how I can develop. I don't want to be put in the box for my development. I see it's quite a bit with IEs.
Yes.
It's a TI rejection. But to say then that that's an example of extrovert intuition negative rather than just TI vulnerable, then brings the question back to an ILE. Okay, if an ILE is using extrovert intuition positive, then that means that when they're showing examples of, for instance, oh, I don't want to be too tied in or too close to this particular person because I think they're holding me back.
All right.
I think to myself, so that's not an example of NE minus. What is it then?
Right. Well, see, then what you're describing there is kind of a tag interaction. Is that this pretty much two functions working together to form like the vertical blocking, like you said.
Yeah, no, but that's the thing. Like, positive and negative almost has to be something to do with information interactions.
Yes, that is how it's formed. Yes,
because every single time it appears in conjunction with a different interaction between different information elements. So it certainly has to be the case. But that also leads to think, aren't these just signifiers for those interactions? Do we even need the signs at the end of the day if we just understand those interactions?
Well, that's the thing, is that the interactions can't be formed with the function dichotomies alone. Like, there's nothing in the function dichotomies themselves that would indicate that such an interaction would take place, and yet we still see it happening.
Well, that's also the tricky part. With even defining this is because it's what Andrew would call a superposition. It doesn't follow a consistent, if you move one space, it should be okay. Whereas if you move two spaces, it becomes more different. It's the opposite. Right. If you move one space, it completely changes, and you move another space in the same direction, something snaps back.
Yeah.
That's why it's so difficult to define. Same thing, process result. But yeah, what I'm saying is that there's clearly a case of an ILE there, right? Where they, like the IEE, are avoiding constraints on on the exploration of possibilities. It's just to do with relationships now rather than do with structures. And that's why I think, is it really the case that the IEE is especially negativist in some way and the ILE is especially positivist? Or is it just that we're just choosing, because of these signs, to focus on the example of an IE removing constraints and ignoring the examples of the ILE reducing constraints in their own way?
See, that's where this gets tricky, because we don't have any, empirical analysis. Because this is all in the realm of, it's all in the realm of math, it's all in the realm of theory, and all we're doing when we talk about these things is purely speculating. Yes. All we can point to is specific examples. Because I like to sit in theory land all day, but it's like.
But that's exactly it. That's where I feel it's on us.
Yeah.
And get to as clear and well deduced a definition as possible.
Right.
And I have yet to see someone put forward a very clear path of deduction from model A through function dichotomies into Raynian dichotomies to create the most complicated and most convoluted dichotomies right at the end, being the superposition ones, process result, positivist, negativist, and yet for some reason we find ourselves relying on these ones for new additions to the theory more than any of the others. Galenko is a good example of this.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that I haven't seen too much defined in the way of the other Riemann dichotomies. Is that you have the Riemann dichotomies that you can track them with just function dichotomies, like yielding obstinate, but then I look online and there's no data on them. So like you said, there's a lot of socionists that are going for these super complex Riemann dichotomies and focusing on those because those have more promising theoretical interactions. And they're not, they're not coming back to first principles at all, where we need to define, like you said, a logical deduction. How are we getting here? And defining kind of the constraints of the model. And we're not sure how these things operate yet. Like you said, we can pick out specific examples. Like we can pick, especially another one is asking declaring. There are asking declaring signs. But how do we know that those are real? Because that interaction is so convoluted. It's a superposition dichotomy.
It's a tertiary level. It relies on previous existing Riemann dichotomies to get to it. Look, now let's go for an easier one. Strategic, tactical.
Okay.
Right? It's clear. It's just inert contact plus intuition or sensation.
Sensing. Yeah.
Right. Now, here's an example of where it goes wrong almost immediately. You would imagine, like, what I would try to deduce, and you disagree, feel free to disagree with me if you want.
Yeah.
Someone who is inert in their intuition and contact in their sensation.
Yeah.
Quite stubborn over their ideas of what the ends are, where things are going to go, or what the most interesting possibilities to look out for are. Whereas they could be quite flexible and easygoing in terms of what we're doing right now, how things are going right now.
Yeah.
Now that certainly matches up with me quite well. Anecdotally. Now, and I'd imagine that the opposite would be, and this also matches my fiance, who I'd say is a good example of an SCI, where they are sort of flexible in terms of what things to be looking out for in the long run, what the possibilities are. They're quite flexible. They allow me to input that quite readily, but they'd be quite stubborn over what's going on right now. I don't like this noise. I don't like this thing. I don't like this thing in my physical environment. I'm going to make sure that thing happens. We are doing this because I don't want to do that. So that's what I would imagine would make sense if you put together inert contact and sensation intuition. Yet when you go to Wikisocion and you read the descriptions of what they're meant to look like, what they're meant to be doing, it seems to contradict that what seems to be quite reasonable deduction. And you have examples. For instance, you have not only this, but even the name is bizarre. Calling an SLE a strategic type suggesting that something's a bit off.
Yeah.
And so what I would imagine an SLE to be like in terms of these concepts is that the SLE is going to be very much decisive in terms of this is how we're going to do things. They're going to take over their physical environment and make it happen a certain way because they're the boss. That will be the inert sensation. But when it comes to some sort of long-term purpose, they'd be waiting for someone else to bring that to them.
Yes.
And if it comes to speculation and new ideas, they won't take much of a strong role in that. They may, not particularly keenly because it's not their particular area of interest, but they go along with speculation to some degree. But I think that makes total sense. Yet you find, I don't know, let's just go to Wikisocion very quickly as an example. Okay, strategic tactical. And let's see what we get. Right. So tacticals, right? That's strategicals, which would be SLE. Focus on goals and manipulate them with methods unsettled. Methods are defined by and modified to fit goals. Prefers to defend goals. Doesn't like to be forced to deviate from them. So the exact opposite of what we'd be imagining for a type which is meant to be quite flexible on their goals and quite set on their methods.
That's very true. Well, one thing that we need to look at is that, if I recall correctly, that study that was done to define those traits was done in like 2003 or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is that we have those properties that you just deduced seem very accurate. Like, I could get behind that. But all the study data that has been done either hasn't had a large enough sample size or was done way before they defined certain aspects of the model. Like, I'm not even sure if they knew about the functional dichotomies back then. Perhaps they just did empirical studies, came to a set of conclusions, and just went with them. You know, like, I don't think that study is super reliable. You know, the data doesn't look very good.
And it doesn't seem to match up. It doesn't match up what we experience the types to be, and it doesn't match up what we deduce from the pre-existing dichotomies. But if even these first level Renan dichotomies are the complete opposite of what they're meant to be, how on earth can we have even the slightest shred of confidence in these tertiary, these third level dichotomies which rely on these superpositions?
Well, one of the things that if we define the theoretical properties of the signs, that's not super. With the positivists, that's like positivist, negativist, that's just going to be something that we deduce. Like, there's going to be, that is a deduction. There's no behavioral study. Like, they did do the behavioral study. They came up with positivists do that, negativists do that. But I still don't agree with those descriptions. You know, we're making theoretical deductions based on how the model moves, in a dynamic sense, but with the superpositions, and saying, okay, we have these signs, we have these signs. What are they probably going to look like? And then we make, deductions based on that. We say, okay, this type has this function, so they're going to do this. And it's not, again, it's just theoretical, but we're not going off of the empirical definitions here. Like, I'm not exactly sure what it's going to say. I'm going to look it up too. I'm going to look up positivist, negativist, because I don't really know how they describe that. But we do know that how the signs are described is different from how the actual trait positivist, negativist is defined. So, like, when it says socially and intellectually more trusting, there's nowhere in the functions themselves that would seem to indicate that.
No. And also, as soon as someone's trying to combine socially and intellectually together, that makes me very suspicious.
Right.
Why on earth would a type, given that we know that they differ in terms of sensation and ethics and intuition and logic, why on earth would they be both socially and intellectually more trusting? And how does that match up with the function dichotomies?
We don't know. We don't know where they got this data from. That's been the main thing. So,
like, right? Let's take a look.
Even the way that we define the signs is different from how they define these traits.
Well, the signs are different ways of being defined. Whether we go to Bukalov, whether we go to Galenko, your approach to signs, who do you get that from?
Is mostly Galenko's positivist, negativist signs.
Yeah.
So he was just going off of that dichotomy. There are obviously a bunch of other signs for a bunch of other things. But just those signs alone, because I've seen a lot of sign descriptions, and the only reason I've been advocating for those is that they make the most sense to me.
Okay, fair enough. I just always find that whenever you see these signs, you just look at the valued information elements, and you can put together, an outcome which can be interpreted to be either positive or negative, depending on how you want to make it fit the theory.
Right.
Yeah, like for instance, people say FE plus, FE minus, depends on whether you're looking at Bukalov or Galenko. But FE plus SI is going to be the more positive emotionality.
Yes.
Because it wants to, some would say, oh, it's because it's increasing the happy mood. And others say, no, it's just reducing the negative of the mood. But then you go to FE plus NI, and that ends up being, well, that's all the harsher emotions regardless. But that's not really FE and NI, it's because there's also SE in there, which makes it more harsh. And in fact, there is also a reducing element of FE plus NI, which is getting rid of the trivial emotions, getting rid of the superficial emotions, and looking at something deeper and more authentic. It's the FENI types which care very much about sort of authentic self-expression. whereas FE plus SI is not really fussed about authenticity. It's about what is good to feel.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel each time I look, I feel as if this positive and negative is being sort of forced on the theory. The theory is being shoehorned into this positive negative, where you could easily interpret it the other way. But what is always apparent are the interactions between these valued information elements.
Oh, right. I mean, they see the interactions and they go, well, what if the interaction means this? And then they, attribute that to a sign. That's basically what they're doing.
Yeah.
Is that they're seeing these interactions in the model and they're going, okay, well, what if the interaction means this? And then we go forth under that assumption. And that's how, mostly they've found the signs so far, or defined the signs. So that, whether or not, and these haven't been, I don't see Gulenko doing a lot of studies. I just see him doing, I just see him writing papers and making models and stuff,
He's TE ignoring.
Right. I would want to do studies. It's just like that would be my thing, is that I'd go out there. First I'd make the definition, be like, okay, we have this thing that's, we theoretically predict that. And then given a large enough sample size, we go out and actually test for it. Like, I think that's a reasonable possibility that nobody seems to be getting on that train.
No. Well, I guess the difficulty is the resource barrier.
Yeah.
You need to have you need to have the money. You need
That's
to have people who are geographically near enough to you to do something with.
Yes, that's very true.
Most the things which we lack as socionics people are money and physical closeness.
Yes, I mean, the only reasonable studies that I've seen done are from Tolanov. He does a lot of studies on different not even theoretical attributes. He'll just say, like, okay, which type is the most egoic? And he'll make a questionnaire, and then he'll evaluate the statistical results and say, like, oh, SLE,
egotistic.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then what was found was SLE was the most egotistic type.
Yeah.
And that's reasonable, we see that.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not sure exactly how much it's to do. It could be narcissism. It could also be the idea that boasting and the action of boasting is something which they feel increases their presence, increases the way they're received by others, makes them powerful seeming, and so that could be a good reason why they tend to answer questions in an egotistic sort of way. It could also be a lack of reflectiveness, which is very true. Intuition. So different things coming together there. That doesn't make sense.
But then we see, well, that's the thing with the statistical analysis, is that, okay, you get the data, but then how are you to interpret the data once you have it? So then that's where we would draw upon the theoretical sides, is that if you correlate, what he's done is he's correlated the studies that he's done with Riemann dichotomies, especially the ones with just the first tier Riemann dichotomies, the ones that are like just defined with the functional dichotomies, and he'll find, okay, a lot of the traits, the most prominent Riemann dichotomy that he's found in his studies is the judicious decisive. That's a very big one that comes up all the time in his studies, is these SENI valuing types versus the NESI valuing types. Like that's been playing a big role in his studies.
Makes sense.
So if we do a lot of those studies, find a lot of those correlations, then we could make a speculative list on the properties of those dichotomies. So
it's a good idea. I think Tangov's doing good work. I need to look into him a lot more, though. I need to give him his due.
Yeah.
It seems quite natural, but these axes, I like the word axes for the quadra values, as it were, that they're very prevalent. Now, we want to talk a bit more about subtypes, like how the quadra come together to form these subtypes.
So we had originally my mentor saw kind of a divide in the way that subtypes were used, because he was also into MBTI, and he was seeing that there were no subtype systems in the MBTI system, but there were always people in the socionics community trying to figure out, like a lot of prominent socialists saying, okay, well, you have your base and creative subtypes. you have your inert and contact subtypes. Like, what kind of system could we make that deals with subtypes in a more efficient manner? And so he came up with this idea of, you have one type that prefers to use his creative function to actualize his ideas, and then you have one person who prefers to weigh more heavily on his mobilizing, because those are two functions which the base makes heavy use of. So then we say, as the person grows, as the person changes, which one have they come to rely on more based on the situations that they've been in? So that's the main premise, is that there's nothing really in the model that defines that. There's nothing that says, okay, which one are you going to prefer? It's more of just, it's speculative, you know.
I do wonder, in terms of, do these subtypes fall into the trap of treating the functions as equal in their qualities to begin with, so that so that showing more of a tendency towards NE and FE for an ENTP is somehow more unusual than showing a tendency towards NE and TI.
Yeah.
And I say that because, the creative function and mobilizer function are so different in terms of the function dichotomy making them up. The FE is going to be like a little version of their NE in terms of leading and mobilizing, and the creative is always going to be, more subtle.
Yeah. Well, we reasoned that there were a lot of different interactions that we could define. Like you said, you talked about the interaction between role and creative. But we decided not to include those kinds of interactions because we wanted to make the theory more simple at first. We didn't want to define a lot in a short amount of time, so we limited the interactions to just the valued functions. We said, okay, so
I was talking about valued functions. I wasn't talking about role.
Yeah. So what we defined was, we said, okay, well, without messing around with the unvalued functions, we're just going to say straight, okay, well, perhaps there are some people who use their creative function more, and perhaps there are some people who use their mobilizing more. Not to say that they're stronger or that they're weaker or anything, but they just rely heavier upon them, and perhaps they've learned to use them. They've adapted to their usage. Maybe people who haven't found a usage for their mobilizing function in too many scenarios. Perhaps if you're like me as an ILI, if throughout my entire life I've always found myself in NT-based scenarios, when would I ever need to use FI prevalently? Perhaps not, So then I would, maybe lean more towards the creative function if I found myself,
Doesn't that just become career choice?
It could. It's possible.
I mean, here's a good example, right? Right, just observing myself.
Yeah.
I'm clearly going into TI mode in this conversation, but the conversation demands it. It's a conversation about theory. Whereas, cycle back 2 hours ago, I was in a restaurant with my grandparents, my sister, her boyfriend. They're duals, they're very happy. And I was just cracking the most ridiculous jokes.
Right.
Like, for instance, I was saying, you ever seen the film Whiplash? That's what they say. Yeah, I've seen it. I said, that's what I call dramaturgy. So I was cracking really awful jokes, but the point is, I was clearly focused then in generating a reaction in the people at the table, and that was pretty much all I was doing throughout that evening, other than having Persian food was very nice. I haven't tried Persian before. I love the dessert, but you see what I mean? It's situational. In a social situation, when I'm relaxed, I'm going to go full on FE.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm thinking to myself, is there really something that's slightly different in the wiring there? Or is it just that we are finding ourselves in different situations more often than others, depending on our lifestyles? And so we start to think of ourselves or identify ourselves as being more NETI for an ENTP or NEFE for an ENTP.
All right. So that is a good argument. And the way that we kind of counter that is that, sure, there's nothing necessarily that describes the change in the wiring, but we do see that there are ILEs who are more introverted, who spend time theorizing all day. And then there are those ILEs who just go out there and just like present themselves all the time, and then they aren't so much interested in theory. Like we do see those intratype differences, you know.
I mean, well, okay, even if you take, you know, an ENTP who's a bit more socially reserved, like take myself. People can say I'm either highly extroverted or highly introverted, depending on the situation. Again, I can spend weeks not really need to see anyone.
Right.
And the point is not even leave the house for a while. Whereas at the same time, if I'm put in an environment where I know what I'm doing, I can be talking more than anyone else.
Right.
Be quite engaging. And so if we talk about an ILE that is very quiet, very much not disposed to express themselves. So they're doing that. They can't be doing that even less than their SI. Their SI needs to be weaker than their FE by definition. So it can't be that low. And it's because they're just really bad at both. In which case, it's a question of, I'd say, probably poor development, if anything else.
That's fair. Well, I mean, it could be situation dependent, but then we see people not even of a specific type. Like if you just say, perhaps there could be extroverts that, given the situation, have a hard time actually being lively, like an ILE, who even in a situation like that has a difficult time being lively because there's no development. Maybe they just didn't develop their FE. That, you know, we could see something like that. I'd say that's enough to qualify as a subtype because they're going to be markedly different from those ILEs who have learned to use their FE.
That's true. So, I guess that also raises the question, is it really to do with subtype, or is it really more to do with gradations based on experience, rather than say this is the socially slow to develop ILE? We can simply say this is an ILE that is just developing more slowly than other ILEs.
Perhaps. And given that this is nurture-based, that there is nothing in the model that would seem to mandate these function subtypes, it could all be just development.
Yeah. That's like, you know, it's hard enough justifying a typology. You know, we have a target painted on us as soon as you say we are type theorists rather than trait theorists.
Yes.
You know, the dominant scientific consensus at the moment is very much pro-trait, not pro-type. Now, we can counter that by saying, at least in socionics, we can say is that there's a very clear metaphysical background towards putting together these typologies. It's not really a typology of people, which are very complex things.
Yeah.
You know? But it's a typology of information and how people vary in working with these distinct categories of information. And it's far harder to disagree with the categories of information.
Yeah.
So, but when you get to subtypes, you don't have that same rationale. You've used it on the types. You can't use it again for the subtypes.
That's true.
So that's why I said maybe it's not really a question of subtypes. Maybe just a question of arcs. There's certain narratives or journeys in a person's relationship, and you know, it doesn't even just be one function either. It's all different functions working together. Like for instance, I can imagine I've noticed maybe several younger ILEs, they can go into their troll phase online.
Yeah.
And you know, what usually happens there is they'll say things without any care about who they offend. And when suddenly they're countered, oh, you've offended that person, they're trying to justify themselves with logic, appealing to some sort of rule. Well, I don't believe in getting offended in this certain thing, so why should you? So again, it's going towards introverted logic to defend. It's like that's a certain arc. And then there's another ILE stage where they realize that's not really going to fly socially. So instead, they're going to try to be very sort of friendly to everyone, not trying to offend anyone. It can come across as even a bit bland. We see this in someone like Mark Zuckerberg, for instance.
Yeah.
And so that's another arc. I wouldn't say he's a distinct subtype. He definitely went through stages when he was younger. Look at Face Mash.
That's true.
That's it. That's what I don't think it's subtype. I think it's just arcs. It's arcs and development. it doesn't necessarily even have to develop in a linear way. People can regress, if you call it regress and progress, in some sort of direction. It's just where they're focusing on and their energies on at a particular moment.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with that is that earlier we had a project where we tried to define development stages, but we just weren't finding anything conclusive, which is why we tried to go towards a subtype theory.
How are you doing that?
Well, we went out. We don't really have money, like we said, money or people.
Yeah.
So we would just it was very theoretical. It was based on, we did a lot of research into ego development, and we went through a lot of books talking about the way that the ego develops, and we tried to normalize that to how the functions are expressed. But when we tried to apply a model like that, we found that our definitions for how development levels were described weren't really adding up in the expression of the person's, personality.
And what do you mean exactly by ego development?
Ego development in the sense that you have a set of, like when we normalize it to the type model, we have the set of functions, and you go through life and you find different ways to express these functions that you didn't know how to before. And that's how we normally tried to track development. And we came up with stages for each function where we said, okay, for this function in this, we tried to stratify it a little bit. We tried to say, okay, in this stage of development, the person uses this function in this manner. And we came to pretty consistent definitions on that. Is that you have the ILE, like you said, the troll ILE, that just wants to reject their usage of FE. And so we would have that as a stage in the ILE's development, is you'd have, okay, this ILE who just doesn't want to use the FE.
Oh, well, I would, they are using FE, really. They are trying to get a reaction. They definitely are, there is FE there, even they aren't really aware of it, that they use it in that way. They haven't examined themselves much. But I think it's clearly the FI rejection and then trying to jump into TI to just say there's no need for FI in this world. I've got TI. Why do I need FI?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and with FI also just not giving the FE which they are using the credence it's due.
Right. I mean, yeah. I was just giving an example.
No, sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. But you'd have, like we said, we define certain things to have certain developmental stages. Like you have dimensionality of functions, and in the function's journey, perhaps it would learn a certain thing that's mandated by its dimensionality, because that's a concept that we explored. Is that your suggestive function can't learn past a certain point, and then we had that kind of those definitions going, is that we have this limit on how the suggestive function is developing. Maybe it couldn't get farther than a certain point, we'd say, and then we define all the levels in between differently. So we'd have like a spectrum of development, and then we came up with a 5-step system for each function, and then we tried to normalize that to the types. We tried to say, okay, well, we'll do an analysis session, and we'll see how your functions have changed throughout the duration of your life, and then we'll assign you a number based on the spectrum that we've come up with. So then we give these number systems to people, and then we look at the expression of their personality. But over time, that wasn't really explaining how the different people within the same type were different from one another. Like we'd have people that were very similar development levels that were, obviously completely different personality-wise. And how do you explain that? Well, obviously it's not the development levels, it must be something else. So we kind of went towards the subtype direction, and here we are.
So how exactly were we to measure the development level in a way that was different and not dependent on their personality type?
Well, you'd have, for example, for NI usage in an ILI, you'd have, for example, in the first stage, the ILI is able to conceptualize these sorts of things. And then you have an ILI towards the end of his life who has gotten so good at NI, he's adapted so much to NI's usage that he's able to do, for example, these sorts of things. And then we'd have a spectrum of, okay, well, throughout the life of the NI user, he'd reach certain milestones in NI thinking that would enable him to do certain things.
I think this is also where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
Because, well, we've always looked at, I always thought we shouldn't really look at type interpersonally so much as intrapersonally. And that rather than have some sort of externalized milestone where any well-developed ILI should be able to reach, I would instead say, is the ILI clearly using whatever they have of their ability to use NI better than their SE?
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, because I think it becomes difficult otherwise. You've got, the way, at least the way I always see the information elements as all like fluid intelligences. And with the grand fluid intelligence being general cognitive ability.
Yeah.
And that essentially what you're doing with a type is you decide a certain structure in how you spend your IQ points.
Yeah.
And that, for instance, mage maxes out on the intuitive logical side. The priest maxes out on their intuitive ethical side with lessons sensation. The warrior, you know, those sorts of archetypes, you could say. But and that if you don't have many points to begin with, because you're, say, lower general cognitive ability, you're not necessarily going to be able to, even spending all your points in introverted intuition, you're not going to reach the same level as someone with, say, genius IQ.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's why we tried to define there being limits. Is that the limits that were independent of somebody's natural born qualities, like you said, like IQ. And obviously that was very hard to define because there are a lot of things that are quite dependent on IQ and other natural born traits. But we tried to do our best to kind of stratify certain functions into certain development levels. And so you'd have, you know, some person with a certain function like suggestive wouldn't be able to go past a certain level in their development.
Yeah, but okay, but even then, let's take, you know, like, let's take an ILI who is, you know, a very, like, a genius level ILI.
Yeah.
Would there never be a situation where they'd be able to use SE to some level?
Yeah.
Or a level that would exceed what I know it probably beggars belief, because maybe a bit far-fetched, but even beyond the ability of a really dumb SLE.
Perhaps, but then using the SE with the high IQ ILI would probably be tempered by something else. Like it'd probably be blocked with something else.
Yes. What do you mean by tempered? Do you mean
tempered? Meaning, you know, he has the high IQ, and that perhaps enables him to see how his internal parts are interacting together to develop a best plan of action. Whereas the dumb SLE is just doing what he's doing. He's not thinking about what he's doing. He's just doing SE. Whereas the ILI is doing this calculated SE with, you know.
Could be. But, you know, I think the best way of looking at this is probably how Bukalov set out the dimensionality.
Yeah.
That, you know, at least with 2D functions, you can put together norms. And so with enough experience in familiar situations, you're going to become able to do this pretty much as well as anyone else in that familiar situation.
Yeah.
Now we know that one-dimensional functions don't have those norms. There may be some other way of putting together, well, purely from experiencing, a way of doing it reasonably well in that situation, or in other situations. I'm not sure exactly how it would work. It would be worth looking at. But either way, even if we just simplify Bukalov to simply a strong function is something which you can use in any situation, and a weak function is something which relies on accumulated experiences to work well.
Yeah.
We take that, which, you know, which is just a string of strong, weak without being bold or cautious.
Yeah.
It makes sense to say that someone who's very intelligent would be more adept at putting together the experiences necessary to reach capability in a broader range of situations.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we tried not to. Well, okay. What we've been discussing is why this is like a defunct model, is because there's so many things that we can see that belong to other scenarios that it's very hard to define just the straight development levels. And now we're in the subtype arena, and we are, we're at least doing the Dave superpowers thing, is that we may be putting people in arbitrary categories, but we're seeing that the people in the same arbitrary categories are pretty similar to each other. You know what I mean? So that's our main reasoning now, is like, okay, even if these categories don't really make that much sense, at least the people in them are pretty damn similar to each other.
Although you did say we also don't have many people.
That's true. I mean, the people that we have so far, we have like,
fair enough.
Yeah. It's still super early. We're still, I mean, we try to get our material out there eventually. You know, I'm going to be starting video lectures on my channel soon to get my material that I've been working on out there, so that people can help us define these things better. So if we have a YouTube community then on our side, then that would help us define things a little bit more rigorously. But you know, it's all up in the air. We don't see, well, the reason we go towards, or the reason I specifically go towards these lofty theoretical goals is because I don't see, well, one reason is just because I'm one of those guys who always pursues the lofty theoretical goals. Emery's one of those guys who would prefer to define the first principles first before doing that sort of thing, which is why he has such an important role in the team, is because he's always going to tell us, okay, we got to do this first.
Wait, who's this?
Emery.
Oh, Emery. Yeah, I remember I was talking
about him. Yeah.
Which is the guy who was your mentor?
His name was, he was just, nobody knew him except on Reddit. He was a Reddit personality. But his name was What I Never Said. And he was a very divisive member of the community, and he ended up leaving because people didn't like his material, and he was getting a lot of flack for the things that he was designing. So, you know, that didn't,
that's sad.
You know, yeah, it's not the greatest outcome, but I still have a lot of his documents saved that we were working on, and I still have a lot of the projects. And I, after he left, tried to continue his research and came up with this subtype theory. So, well, I'm doing my best with what I've been left behind, and we're trying to define things that I see as promising theoretically. So we may not have everything etched out right now, but hopefully in the future. Yeah.
There's, you know, a lot of socionics really is.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what subtype would you give to yourself then?
I would say that in the thematic sense that we were describing earlier, I have much more of an NIFI accentuation. Like I'm extremely socially introverted. I'm not very focused on mechanics so much as just, like I said, lofty intuitive ambitions. And I have the ability to algorithmically separate things in a TE manner, but it's not something that I prefer to do all the time. It's not something that I've, you know, because I see other ILIs in the community that seem to just be focused on algorithmic separation and not their own relations with other people and their own values.
And what do you mean by algorithmic separation?
Well, just the way that TE carries out systems logic. So in the sense that you'd be defining the dynamic aspects of the theory, is that a lot of the ILIs in our community are focusing on dynamic interactions in sociology, interactions in the theory, things like that, whereas I'm not so much focused on those things, but I have the capability to focus on them. I have the capability to do that kind of research, but I tend to process more. I tend to go inside myself more and not pursue those kinds of goals, you know.
But would you say that, like, what I'd imagine from an ILI with very much a focus on FI is very much a sort of personal, well, the usual harsh judgment, where they're very invested on what they think or feel about situations, who they like, who they think they might actually like, who they actually really don't like. and they dwell a lot more on that, on who's let them down, who is someone who they can't trust, that sort of thing.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think about that kind of thing all the time. Is a lot of my life is weighing the things that I've gathered, weighing the relations that I've kind of assembled along the years, and seeing how everything in my life has progressed to the point that it has now through relations with other people. So I'm very focused on how my life is changing, how my personal development is moving, and how that's actualized through the people that I interact with the most closely. So
right. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, well, one thing I've always wondered, and there's also what has surprised me about you to some degree, is that I'm used to the sort of dialectic between alpha NTs and gamma NTs.
Yeah.
And dialectic is one where the alpha NTs would say that there is a perfect system out there which can explain everything.
Yeah.
Whereas for gamma NTs, it's the opposite, that there is no perfect system. We're just working with, the tool which has so far not been busted.
Yeah.
And that there's an inherent skepticism towards running away with any particular theory and trying to go deep diving in on it. I think an ILI would be more inclined to deep dive in an LIE because there's more TI there for an ILI. But I do find it curious and interesting that you are very theoretically interested in the way that I am also quite theoretically interested.
Yeah, I mean, I've been typed in, Gulenko's DCNH system.
Yeah.
I've been typed as TI subtype in that system.
Normalizing.
Right. So I am much more focused on, because, I would say that there's no proper system. And my motives are much different than the alpha NT. Is I'm not super duper trying to define these aspects of the theory. I explore the aspects of the theory because they're fun to explore. Because I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect system. I don't think everything will be set in stone like most alpha NTs say that is going to happen. And that's why I tend to get annoyed sometimes when they say, okay, well, this aspect of the model is speculative and it's not really, hasn't been defined properly. I'm going to say, well, I don't really care, I'm just going to go for it no matter what, because I'm having fun messing around with these systems. So that's my main perspective on how I operate within typology, is that I'm not really looking for truth, but if I find truth on the side, then that's a definite plus. So
for you, it's just that intellectual exploration.
Yeah.
With theoretical constructs.
Right.
Okay.
So it's not really like,
I see. I just do think we need to wrap up soon because I got to get to bed. Otherwise, I'm going to be even more of a wreck than I am now. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Ethan. Do you have anything to ask me?
Yeah. I mean, if you were to, I don't know how much you've watched my videos or seen the subtype theory, but if you were to evaluate yourself, what would you say about your function usage?
Oh, as I said, it's a good question. I would say, I think it varies in situations. Situations. Like I said, I know I'm a very distinct sort of character when I'm in socionics mode. Very much so.
Yeah.
I know I'm a very different character when I'm in my workplace mode because of the certain pressures on me. And when I'm out and about seeing other people, I can see the consistencies in there in terms of information elements.
Right.
I can also see how I'm adapting and adjusting to the needs of my environment, because if we don't, we get into trouble.
Yeah.
So I'm still not really sure what mode can be really consistent.
Okay. And that's the thing, is that if you were one of those types of ILEs who is situational, then we would probably put you as more of a balanced subtype. So,
maybe. Why I don't know.
You never know.
I would be the NETI in this situation.
Okay.
Almost certainly any TI in this situation.
Okay.
And based on what you said before about TI and SI, maybe even any TI-SI, because an ongoing theme, or at least my reaction to the theoretical developments in sociology has been these basics aren't sorted out.
Yes.
So none of it really makes sense at this particular point.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where I'd actually like to be in the long run? I don't think so. I'd like to see it all connected up and then leading to something fantastic in terms of unlocking all the full potential of what this theory can be. Whether that's in terms of, for instance, creating a great dating site, questions of creating great teams of people working, which whole businesses will run on. Imagine increased productivity if people don't fall out in the workplace. Or imagine being assigned to a roommate, who understands what you're about, and you don't have any conflicts, and you don't screw up your educational experience. Or imagine if in a school, if a teacher is matched up to students, and that teacher just has a way of explaining things which the students perfectly understand.
Yeah.
And imagine all the increased benefits that could come from that. Just those niggles in our relationships being ironed out. And then, and then also moving beyond that, not even just pursuing dualities, but also a better understanding of other people who are different to us. And once you have a better understanding, moving past the differences and bridging them.
Yeah.
That's the stuff which I think is really cool. I just think we need to straighten out the theoretical stuff first. And what sort of, I don't want to say gets my goat at the moment, is when you see people who dive completely into random dichotomies, and they then come up with a typing which makes no sense from a model A perspective, and they're saying that's the way it is. That's their type definitely, and so there's a complete lack of agreement, and so essentially people are shouting completely different theories at each other without actually realizing it's not the same theory anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I try to type with Riemann dichotomies from what I've learned. The theoretical properties that we've defined in Riemann dichotomies. But when I come to a certain person's type and I compare that with somebody who's just using model A, I respect their propensity for the regular model. I'm not going to shout at them, okay, the Riemann dichotomy typing is accurate, because I was just using theoretical definitions. Like, this is for fun. This is what I've researched, and this is what I've seen. So I'm going to respect your typing because you're just using the base components. That's why I looked at your I actually looked at your albums in and I saw a lot of the people in there, and it was a lot of interesting typings that I wouldn't have agreed with at first, but I saw them from a model A perspective. So I think there's a lot of, if people weren't so assertive about the theoretical components, I think people in different interpretations could get along a lot better.
Yes, but there is always a question of going on. There's also a question of people talking about different things, but thinking that they're agreeing with each other.
Yeah,
a lot as well. And there's also a part of me which is a lot more SE involved, at least in the area of socionics, where I'd say no. I think we actually need to fight out these differences in our theoretical understandings, and may the best one win. And if we do that, maybe we'll be able to get some sort of consensus where we can then finally, at long last, start to unlock all that amazing potential from some sort of research, having some sort of outcome.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I am. It's like it's been 4 decades.
Yeah.
We're still in theory.
Yeah. I mean, we're not mainstream science,
No.
We don't have teams. That's why we're still stuck in theory.
Yeah.
Like in the olden days when you had scientists that were just independent, they was stuck in their own thing. Science used to be called natural philosophy because there wasn't a lot of analysis being done. That's kind of where we are now.
But that was a different paradigm. That was an introverted logic paradigm where there wasn't an expectation of extra logic. We live in an extroverted logic paradigm. And I don't think we've come out and accepted that's how it is now, and we've got to adapt accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's true. We just don't have the resources as of yet, but once if we do get the resources eventually, there's a lot of promising stuff to be done. So, you know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Right, just before we pack up, let's see what any questions on the here in the live chat that may be worth asking. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's see if any. Just looking for question marks. Why? Japanese kanji person says, why is TI and socionics seen as categorizing information? Well, that's a good question. I'd say it's because it's about putting together an internal structure. It's about theoretical consistency between whatever propositions are made. So when it comes to categories, you're forming certain rules which are consistently kept. And so you're sorting usually objects of some sort, whether it's a concept or a physical thing, according to those structures. So that would be my answer. Any other questions? Let's see. Ever had a fizzy milk Persian style? Not yet. I want to though. I mean, there's like a yogurt drink. I need to try it. I definitely need to try the yogurt drink, but I didn't. I had the Persian wine instead. Yeah. Okay, that's all the questions. Great. Thank you so much, Ethan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a blast. So
let's do this more often. Yeah. If you want to discuss any celebrity typings, let me know.
Yeah, for sure.
This is me trying SE, so I'm literally releasing a challenge to anyone to debate me on a benchmark typing. We'll prep, and then we'll discuss it live. See what happens. It might be that we got some wrong. Very happy if we got something wrong. We can then change that, because every now and again I discover one I'm actually quite doubtful. You know, it's not a perfect process. It's just better than what other people are doing at the moment, from what I can see. But I think we should start having these conversations as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Speak soon. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. See ya.